My name is Aurelia, and I am 28 years old. The day my sister smashed my son's birthday. Gifts while everyone laughed is a day I will never forget. It was supposed to be simple. Warm lights in our backyard, blue and silver balloons tied to every chair, a chocolate cake with my son's favorite cartoon hero standing proudly on top. I had spent weeks planning it, saving quietly from my freelance design projects, cutting down on my own expenses just to see his eyes light up when he opened his presents. He was turning 6 years of being the only reason I kept breathing after my husband walked away. 6 years of fighting whispers from relatives who said I was too young, too emotional, too weak to raise a child alone. I ignored them all, because when my son wrapped his tiny arms around my neck and said, "Mama, you're my superhero," nothing else mattered. That afternoon, the yard was full. My cousins clustered near the grill, laughing too loudly. My mother supervised the food like a general commanding an army. My sister Celine arrived late as always, heels clicking against the stone path. Oversized sunglasses, a smirk that never quite reached her eyes. She didn't hug me. She barely looked at my son. Instead, she surveyed the decorations and said, "Wow, Aurelia, you really went all out. Must be exhausting pretending everything's perfect." I swallowed it for my son. The gifts were stacked neatly on a long white table, bright wrapping paper, shiny ribbons, each one chosen with care. A remote control car, a set of building blocks he had begged for. A small bicycle I found secondhand but restored until it looked brand new. They weren't expensive, but they were meaningful. When it was time to open them, everyone gathered around. Phones were out. Cameras ready. My son sat cross-legged, grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. He reached for the first box. That's when Selene laughed. "Wait," she said loudly. "Let's see if they're actually worth opening." Before I understood what she meant, she stepped forward, picked up the top gift, and dropped it hard onto the ground. The sound of cracking plastic cut through the air. Everyone froze for half a second. Then someone chuckled. She lifted the next one and slammed it down harder. Wrapping paper tore. The remote control car's wheel snapped clean off. My son's smile vanished. His small hands trembled in his lap. "Celine, stop," I whispered. She didn't. One by one, she smashed them. The building blocks scattered across the pavement. The bicycle tipped over, handlebars bent. She kicked it lightly as if testing its weakness. And then laughter. Not from strangers, from family. My cousin covered her mouth but didn't step in. My uncle shook his head like it was harmless drama. Even my mother muttered, "It's just a joke." Don't be so sensitive. A joke. My 6-year-old's birthday reduced to entertainment. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't cry. He looked at me instead, confused, searching my face. For instructions, for safety, and I felt something inside me crack louder than any toy. "Why would you do that?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. Celine shrugged. "Maybe next time don't try so hard to impress people. It's embarrassing. Because I didn't have a husband beside me? Because I didn't have her money? Because I dared to create joy without asking permission?" The air felt heavy, suffocating. Conversations resumed awkwardly around us, as if broken dreams were easy to sweep under the rug. That's when my father stood up. He had been sitting quietly near the edge of the yard, watching everything. He was a man of few words, always choosing silence over confrontation. Growing up, I learned not to expect him to defend me. When Celine mocked my clothes, when relatives questioned my choices, he would simply adjust his wedding ring and stare at the floor. But this time, he didn't look down. He walked slowly toward the destroyed gifts. His shoes crunched over shattered plastic. The murmurs faded again, this time edged with discomfort. He bent down, picked up the broken remote control car, and examined it carefully. Then he looked at my son. "What did you wish for this year?" he asked softly. My son sniffed. "I wished for everyone to be happy." The words hit harder than any slap. My father's jaw tightened. He slipped his hand into his pocket, pulled it out, and stared at his wedding ring for a long moment. The same ring he had worn for over 30 years. The symbol of loyalty, of family, of unity. Without warning, he slid it off. Gasps rippled through the yard. He held the ring in his palm, staring at it as if seeing it for the first time. My mother stood abruptly. "What are you doing?" she hissed. He didn't answer her. Instead, he looked directly at Celine, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Disappointment. Sharp enough to cut through blood. He opened his mouth to speak, and everything changed. My father stood in the center of the yard, his wedding ring resting in his open palm, his voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced every whisper. He looked straight at Celine and said 4 words that shattered More than glass and plastic. Family is not cruelty. Silence swallowed the laughter whole. The words echoed in my ears, in everyone's ears. Simple, clear, final. Celine blinked as if she hadn't heard him correctly. Dad, it was just a joke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A joke, he repeated slowly, does not humiliate a child. A joke does not crush what a mother builds with love. His hand closed around the ring. For years, he continued, turning slightly so everyone could hear, I told myself silence keeps peace. I told myself ignoring wrong keeps family together. His eyes drifted to my mother. But silence feeds cruelty. And today, I refused to feed it. No one moved. The same relatives who had laughed minutes ago now stared at the ground. The same mouths that found amusement in my son's pain were suddenly dry and speechless. My father walked toward my son and knelt in front of him. He brushed a gentle hand over his hair. You deserved better, he said softly. My son finally cried then, not loudly, not dramatically. Just quiet tears sliding down his cheeks. And that broke me more than anything else. I stepped forward, wrapping my arms around him, feeling the tremble in his small body. I had promised myself I would never let him feel small the way I did growing up. Yet here we were. Celine crossed her arms. You're all overreacting. It's not like the gifts were expensive. And there it was. The truth behind her cruelty. Value measured in price tags. Worth calculated in numbers. They were expensive, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. They cost me late nights. They cost me skipped meals. They cost me pride. She rolled her eyes. That's when my father stood again. If you cannot respect this child, he said firmly, you cannot stand in this family as if nothing happened. My mother stepped forward, anger flashing across her face. So what, you're choosing her over us? My father looked at the ring in his hand once more. 30 years of marriage. 30 years of tolerating sharp words disguised as humor. 30 years of watching one daughter dim so the other could shine. I am choosing what is right, he replied. Then he did something none of us expected. He walked to the long white table, now covered in torn paper and broken pieces, and placed the ring down on it. A clear message. Commitment means nothing without kindness. Gasps filled the yard again, but this time no one dared laugh. Celine's confidence cracked. You can't be serious. I am, he said calmly. Until this family understands that love is not control, not mockery, not competition, this ring means nothing. My heart pounded. For years I had felt alone in that house, like the extra piece that didn't quite fit, and suddenly for the first time someone stood beside me, not because I begged, not because I cried, but because it was right. The party ended quietly. Guests slipped away without finishing their plates. The balloons still floated, but the celebration had shifted into something deeper than cake and candles. When most of them were gone, my father picked up the broken bicycle. He tested the bent handlebar, then looked at me. We can fix this, he said. He wasn't just talking about the bike. That evening he stayed. He helped me gather every broken piece. He apologized to my son, not for himself, but for not speaking sooner. And Celine? She left without saying goodbye. In the weeks that followed, things changed. My father moved into a small apartment nearby. My mother refused to speak to him at first. Relatives called me dramatic, ungrateful, a troublemaker, but something inside me was no longer afraid of those words, because I had seen what real strength looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need an audience. It was a man removing his wedding ring and saying, "Family is not cruelty." A month later, my father showed up at my door with a brand new remote control car. Not extravagant, not over the top, just thoughtful. He handed it to my son and said, "This one is built stronger." My son smiled again, the same wide, pure smile from before the party. And this time, no one smashed it. As for me, I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who measured love in money. I stopped shrinking to keep others comfortable. I stopped confusing tolerance with peace. Family forever does not mean accepting abuse. Family forever means protecting the smallest heart in the room. Family forever means speaking when silence becomes betrayal. If this story moved you, if you believe that love should protect, not humiliate, then make sure you subscribe to this channel and become part of a community that stands for strength, dignity, and truth. Your support helps stories like mine reach more hearts that need courage. Because sometimes, all it takes is 4 words to change everything. Family is not cruelty. My name is Aurora, and I am 29 years old. My dad slapped me on his birthday, and the sound of it still echoes in my head whenever I think about that night. It was supposed to be a simple family dinner. Nothing fancy, just a small gathering at home with cake. candles and forced smiles. I had spent weeks saving to buy him a gift. Something modest but thoughtful. Because no matter how harsh he'd always been with me, I still wanted his approval. When I handed him the wrapped box, my hands were shaking, not from excitement but from fear. He tore it open in front of everyone, his face twisting the moment he saw what was inside. Then he looked at me like I was dirt under his shoe and shouted, "What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" The room went silent. Before I could even speak, his hand flew across my face. My head snapped to the side, my cheek burning, my ears ringing. I remember my mother looking down at the table, my relatives frozen, pretending not to see. No one said a word. I left with tears in my eyes. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just grabbed my jacket and walked out, my vision blurry, my chest tight like it was about to explode. The night air felt cold against my skin as I ran away from home, the house shrinking behind me like it had finally rejected me for good. All my life, I'd been told I was a burden, a mistake, someone who should be grateful for even being allowed to exist. That slap wasn't just pain, it was confirmation of everything he'd ever made me believe about myself. I walked for hours, not knowing where I was going, only knowing I couldn't go back. At night, everything changed. I was standing near a quiet street, trying to figure out how I'd survive until morning, when a car slowed down beside me. Before I could react, someone grabbed my arm. I was pushed into a car, my mouth covered, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. My mind screamed that this was it, that my life was about to end in some dark, forgotten place. I struggled, but the door slammed shut and the car sped away. My whole body shook as tears streamed down my face. I kept thinking about my dad's words, about the slap, about how worthless he'd called me, and how now I really was alone. The man inside the car finally spoke, his voice calm in a way that terrified me even more. He turned his head slightly and said, "Hello, dear. I am your biological father." For a moment, I thought I'd lost my mind. I stared at him, unable to understand what I'd just heard. Biological father? My whole life, I'd believed the man who slapped me was my real dad. The man driving noticed my confusion and told me to breathe, to listen. He said he'd been watching from a distance for years, waiting for the right moment, and that what happened at the birthday party pushed him to act. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or laugh hysterically. Fear and disbelief tangled inside me until I felt numb. He explained that my mother had lied decades ago, that I wasn't the child my so-called father thought I was. The man who raised me had always resented me, not just because of his cruel nature, but because deep down he suspected I wasn't truly his. Hearing that didn't make the pain go away, it made it sharper. Every insult, every punishment, every cold look suddenly made horrifying sense. The man driving said he had proof, documents, records, and that he wanted to protect me. I didn't know whether to trust him, but something in his eyes wasn't threatening. It was sad, regretful, like he'd lost time he could never get back. We drove to a small apartment on the edge of the city. He didn't touch me, didn't raise his voice. He gave me water, a blanket, and space. That night I barely slept. My face still hurt from the slap, but my chest hurt more from the realization that my entire life had been built on a lie. I kept replaying my dad's voice in my head. "What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" And for the first time, I wondered if the problem had never been me at all. Maybe I wasn't worthless. Maybe I'd just been trapped in the wrong story. The next morning, the man showed me everything. Birth records, old photos of my mother with him, legal documents I could barely understand. My hands trembled as I held the papers, my name printed there like proof that I existed beyond the cruelty I'd grown up with. He told me my so-called father had no legal right to treat me the way he did, and that what happened on his birthday wasn't just abuse. It was the final mistake he'd ever make. I didn't fully understand what he meant by that, but there was something in his tone that made me both scared and hopeful at the same time. As the sun rose, lighting the room softly, I realized my life had split into two parts. Everything before the slap and everything after. I didn't know yet that 2 weeks later, a judge would take everything from the man who raised his hand against me. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, someone was standing on my side, and my story was only just beginning. 2 weeks can feel like a lifetime. When your entire past is collapsing and a new truth is clawing its way into the light. Those 14 days after my dad slapped me on his birthday were filled with paperwork, quiet conversations, and moments where I'd suddenly start shaking for no reason at all. The man who told me, "Hello, dear, I am your biological father," stayed true to his word. His name was Daniel, and every day he proved, slowly, carefully, that he wasn't here to control me, but to give me something I'd never had before: protection. He didn't rush me to call him Dad. He didn't demand gratitude. He just kept saying, "What happened to you was wrong, Aurora, and it's going to be answered for." The legal process started faster than I expected. Daniel's lawyer explained that the slap wasn't just a family matter. It was assault, and the years of emotional abuse, documented, witnessed, proven. My stomach twisted when I realized I'd have to face the man who raised me, the same man who humiliated me in front of everyone and screamed, "What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" The same man whose hand left a mark on my face that night. Part of me wanted to run again, disappear somewhere no one knew my name. But another part of me, a stronger part I didn't know I had, was tired of running. When we walked into the courtroom, my legs felt like they might give out. He was already there, sitting stiffly in his chair, looking smaller than I remembered. For the first time in my life, he didn't look powerful. He looked afraid. His eyes met mine, and instead of rage, I saw panic. The judge asked me to speak, and my voice shook at first, but I didn't stop. I told them everything, how I'd grown up walking on eggshells, how nothing I ever did was good enough, how on his birthday he slapped me and screamed like I wasn't even human. I told them how I left with tears in my eyes, how I ran away from home, how that night I was pushed into a car, convinced I was being kidnapped, only to hear words that shattered my entire understanding of my life. The room was silent as the evidence was presented. Medical photos of the slap, messages, witness statements from relatives who had seen the abuse but stayed quiet for years. DNA results that confirmed the truth. He wasn't my biological father. The man who always treated me like an unwanted burden had no legal claim over me at all. Watching his face change as each piece of evidence stacked against him felt surreal. He tried to interrupt, to argue, but the judge shut him down with a firm voice that echoed through the courtroom. Then came the moment I'll never forget. The judge looked straight at him and said that his actions, physical assault, emotional abuse, and years of mistreatment, had consequences. Everything he'd used to control me was stripped away in that instant. His legal rights over me were terminated, his access to certain shared assets frozen, his reputation exposed. The same man who once stood over me in rage was now being told, calmly and clearly, that he had lost everything. I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy the way movies make revenge look. What I felt was relief, like I could finally breathe without fear. Outside the courtroom, the sun felt brighter than it ever had before. I realized something important then. Justice didn't erase the pain, but it gave it meaning. It told me that what I went through mattered, that I mattered. Daniel stood beside me, not touching, just present, and asked if I was okay. For the first time in my life, when someone asked me that, I believed they actually cared about the answer. I nodded, even though tears were falling again, not from shame this time, but from release. In the days that followed, I started rebuilding, slowly, carefully, therapy, new routines, a small apartment that felt like mine, not a place I was afraid to exist in. I stopped hearing my dad's voice in my head every time I made a mistake. When I thought of his words, "What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" they no longer defined me. They defined him. I began to understand that his slap on his birthday wasn't the end of my life. It was the moment the truth finally fought its way out. I'm sharing my story because I know I'm not alone. Somewhere out there, someone is watching this, feeling small, feeling trapped, feeling like they deserve the pain they're given. You don't. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who are supposed to protect us, but that doesn't mean they get to write our ending. My dad slapped me on his birthday. 2 weeks later, a judge took everything from him. And in losing his power over me, I finally found my own.